Hi everyone, I'm Jyoti Nukula, Director of Product for Developer Platform at Netflix.
Hi everybody, my name is Jeff Kemp. I'm part of the Business Technology Leadership Team at Indeed.
I'm Ash. I'm with Pinterest. For the last 10 or so years, I've done a little bit of everything: DevOps, platform engineering, data engineering, and now I lead a few teams focusing on developer experience, and we partner with folks across of engineering to identify bottlenecks and look at the data and fix things.
Hi everyone, my name is Uma. I lead developer productivity in Dropbox. Just like how the panelist was telling, I look at different teams, working with them on identifying bottlenecks, and also to make developer experience better in Dropbox.
Hey folks, Jesse Adamitz. I lead developer platform and platform strategy for Twilio.
How about a quick round of applause for our panelists here? Excellent. So we're going to start with our first question. We want to know, developer experience has come a long way in a short amount of time, and we'd love to hear from each of you kind of how you've evolved your use of productivity data. Now that we're collecting it, how do you use that data to kind of drive daily decision making?
I can go first. I can share a little bit about our journey so far at Pinterest and a success story. Hopefully I don't go too long. But in the beginning, I think we made, when we started on this journey, we made a critical mistake a lot of companies make, which is that we started looking at metrics that were easy to measure but not super meaningful, right? Your main offenders here, lines of code, commit volume, story points. So that didn't really give us a good baseline for measuring developer output or experience. What came after that was cool. We got top-down investment, so we actually built a program. We put people to task on things, and we told them go make number go up, make number go down, do the thing. And so people started looking at multidimensional metrics, DORA. So we looked at DORA. We also had sentiments surveys going out, calculating NPS across different tooling categories, and that was cool. But it created a few problems. Right, number one, we had to do everything manually, so we're now creating these bespoke tools and scripts and putting things into BI tooling in one area for quantitative data. On the other hand, we had qualitative data that was, being in a silo. We had to export it into spreadsheets, and if we wanted to join those two and get insights, now we had to do additional work. And so what ended up happening, a very interesting kind of, primary and secondary effect. The primary effect was it took us so long to make sense of things that, the teams that we wanted to help sort of moved on and focused on other things. They funded projects for the whole semester that didn't involve productivity. And, one of the interesting consequences of that was that we ended up doubling down on the known hotspots, right? So we ended up just focusing on the things that we knew were problems, just with additional data, which only gets you so far. So the real breakthrough came when we started using DX as a platform and looking at better framework for measuring things, right? DORA is a good starting point, but in our case, it didn't allow us to apply it to all our engineering teams, right? So looking at effectiveness, speed, quality, and impact now, and being able to ingest qualitative data and quantitative data into the same location, right? Now we were able to really get insights, delve into problem pain points, right? And be able to work with teams to identify opportunities and drive for outcomes, right? So really quickly, I want to share like a success story. So
yeah, please.
Yeah, the end of January, we completed our first survey for the year, and we looked at the results, and we identified that there was an increase in DXI, the Developer Experience Index, of 11 points for one of our teams, our web team. This is a team that's exemplary, right? They champion productivity. They self-organized. They have like these roundtables where they talk about pain points and improve things. And, an 11 point is significant, right? It's about, I think the formula is like 13 minutes per developer per week, which is about 10 hours a year, right? And so multiply that by 11 by the number of folks is about 200. And that came out to about 22,000 hours, right? Significant cost savings. We were able to get this insight using the platform, right? Of DX, and that's really cool. That translates to dollars. That's about $2.5 million in savings. So why is this a success? I think, aside from the fact that it looks really cool on a slide deck, right? The working model, I think, because when it comes to developer productivity, this is the last thing I'll say.
Hope not.
it becomes it's interesting, right? Like you can't really grow a developer productivity team sublinearly to the size of your engineering organization, right? In large organizations like Pinterest, that's kind of untenable. So what you really want to do is focus on making the right investments on the platform so that you can get to, increase the time to grok and time to value for people, and then make things as self-serve as possible. And then those champions will sort of find you and do the heavy lifting.
No, that's great. We love to hear those stories. And yeah, the 13 minutes per saving, we do have the math. We can show it to you later. So, okay, who's next?
So at Indeed, we have a very heavy data-focused culture. So we have instrumented data under everything under the sun, and so very much similar to you. Like we focused on what you could measure, and this is ancient history at this point. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago. I've been with Indeed 9.5 years, I think, at this point. So like I'm a fossil. So so I've been involved off and on since a few years into my tenure at Indeed, and we focused on kind of the same sorts of things that you were describing as well, where it's delivery lead time, it's tickets, it's code review turnaround, it's these metrics that are tangible and measurable. But they get you into trouble because you're getting teams to find better ways to game the system around those metrics. And so, when we were talking about Jira-based delivery lead time, what we really learned from that effort was you get really amazing results for Jira automation. Not productivity, but automation. People can get that pending close state done immediately if they really have to care about it. But ultimately, it never actually translates into the value to the business. So we got our teams to move from whatever number it was to lower number. But when we kind of stopped and said, well, how do people feel about their productivity? How do they feel like they're moving faster? Are they actually doing more or feeling good about the work? That was really our first evolution into more of a survey-based or less direct measurement focus. And so we've kind of over 7 years at this point been able to kind of build upon that approach. So moving away from a focus on solely direct measurement data to more of a balanced approach between qualitative data, quantitative data. And the next evolution of that I would really like to share a little bit about, that I've been partnering very heavily with DX on, is how we can get more than just software engineering focused productivity. Delivering software is a team sport. It's product, it's UX, it's data science, it's also software engineering, absolutely. But without all functions being able to fire on all cylinders and have clear process and clear accountability and having problems solved for them across the delivery lifecycle, we're never going to be able to actually deliver quickly. We're going to be focused on that Jira metric. It's not actually moving faster, actually getting problems solved. So I'll share a fun win for me. So we've been a DX customer since probably, I think, August of last year. We've done 2 snapshots since we started. We have an effort at Indeed today to really kind of revolutionize the way we think about our product operating model. So how we identify customer problems, how we deliver those solutions to market. So we were able to partner directly with our UX partners, our product leadership, and get baseline measurements for them on how they think about our transition into this new product operating model. And we were able to identify from our very first snapshot that the biggest pain point in cross-team collaboration for our software engineering team was the fact they didn't know how to get user research. So we were able to take that feedback and go straight to our UX leadership and our product leadership and say, we have user research for you folks. Like, we just need to let people know how to find it. So let's do some office hours. Let's get some tools in place. Let's really double down on this and make sure that people know what exists, what is valuable to them, and how they can utilize it within their product. And by our second snapshot, we were able to, I think we swung about 10 points on cross-team collaboration.
Wow.
And we were able to move, I think, 6 points on user research or user focus. So just kind of this building an ever greater focus on all of R&D and making sure we're able to deliver effectively.
Netflix. So similar to like what the other two have shared, very similar story. Even at Netflix, we have both qualitative and quantitative measurement happening. So qualitative, we use DXI, for sentiment analysis. So previously, we used to have like a homegrown surveys being done, and one thing that we found was really missing through that is getting the industry understanding of where do we stand with respect to the industry. So we didn't have those industry benchmarks to go off of, and moving to DX, it has been super helpful for us to understand where we stand with respect to the industry. And on the quantitative side, I think we are still nascent and early in that phase right now. We have something called, we have adopted DORA metrics for like deployment frequency, but I think we are working with DX now on the Core 4 framework. We are still in early stages with them there. That said, we also employ something called scorecards for tech health to measure how far off we are from where we want to be. And we have scorecards across, like, for example, test coverage, test insights, production readiness. And these are something which we have found very powerful, where we have seen engineering teams use these in their team meetings or in ops reviews to measure against and drive the results. So these scorecards again have these tiers. So you have all the way from like stone, bronze, silver, gold. So it sort of also builds a gamified tension into this, where everyone wants to at least grow from, like, nobody wants to be in Stone Age. People want to be at least called bronze or silver. So we are seeing there's a lot of adoption and powerful mechanisms through that as well. And I do want to share a very interesting win for us. Through DX survey, one of the things which we realized, or we got a signal, was that developers or our engineers were feeling that they didn't have time for focused work. And now that we have this organization-wide insights, we could go and convince senior leadership. And we experimented with something called Deep Work Week, where for a week there are no meetings, exclusive focused time for everyone to work on things that they care about and matter most. And we tried that for one cycle, and it proved very effective. That now other orgs like infrastructure engineering, the whole of infrastructure engineering has adopted Deep Work Week. We are still getting the results out to see how valuable it is or not, but this is just an example of how we were able to drive cultural conversations, not just at the leadership level, but also at the team level. And I'm not saying that meetings are the only thing that drive focus, but that's at least one of the things that we could move and we could tangibly make some improvement. So that's a big win for us on something that we wouldn't have been able to drive or understand these drivers if not for having those org-wide analysis from DX survey.
Well, it's great to hear. Yeah, thank you. Sure, Uma.
Yeah, very similar to what other companies just mentioned, right? I think for Dropbox specifically, I can talk about the evolution of data in the last 3 years. Anybody who starts on the developer productivity journey, when you search for it, it's all about space metrics and DORA metrics. And rightfully so, we started with the satisfaction survey as the first one in Google Forms. And it has been very, very hard to get any kind of participation across the company. And the reason we started engaging with DX was to get the amazing, exceptional response rate that they promised. So the first 2 years ago, when we went for DX, we went for the satisfaction survey as the first one. We had close to 90% response rate, which was great. And we were able to get amazing insights with the different organization and whatnot. But anecdotally, what we also realized was moving that metrics, the satisfaction, is incredibly hard. And it's roughly proportional to the stock price of the company. So it's very, very hard for you to actually move it. So that was the first inflection point for us. Hey, we spent a lot of time in actually investing in developer productivity, but metric movement is very hard. As Jyoti was also mentioning, whenever we go to exec reviews, the first thing they will ask is, okay, your CSAT is good. Can we compare against the benchmark? Where is the benchmark? So it becomes a much, much harder problem to kind of convince what value productivity actually brings to the company for the CFO and whatnot. So the next journey of that was once we had the CSAT survey, where we are right now is to level playing the field across the company, where we're going after Core 4 framework. So people within the organization, within platform, within infrastructure, within our core organization, they all talk about the same framework. So there is no confusion about, hey, do you measure this metric this way, you measure this metric that way? It doesn't happen, right? Okay, this is a metric that is aligned with your top leadership. This is how we are going to measure our productivity. And for us, that was a huge win, actually. So we are talking the same language across the different organization. And that is, in my mind, a strong win for Dropbox, because 2 years ago, we were not at the point where we can talk about the same metrics. So right now, we are at a point where we are measuring DXI very closely. We are at the early stages of DX Core 4 framework, and we've attached close to how do we drive the speed of conversation within the organization, PR cycle time, PR throughput. So these are all like considered as like top line metrics for the company, and that's the stage that we are right now with DX actually.
Excellent, thank you.
Too. I was say maybe we should intro ourselves with our latest participation percentage.
I love that.
We got 97 on our last one.
We should have given you numbers.
I was pretty stoked with that.
That's amazing.
What you were just saying actually enforces the point I was going to add to everybody's same trajectory, that the standardization I think is an interesting point. Similar to the journey, we had DORA metrics. But we found as Twilio was doing M&As, for example, it's different deployment orchestration systems, different CI systems, et cetera. And some of the M&As actually even had a hard time joining Twilio's platform, right? So the measurements wouldn't have been standardized. I hadn't even thought of that. But when Twilio was, in the history of Twilio, had DORA metrics aggregated. Like it was how you got the metrics from these systems. And I think most people don't realize that that's okay, it's indicative, especially of the digital transformation, but you've got to get it down to the teams. And I think DX was a big part of getting that team data when we joined it with kind of the organizational chart. Then we could say, even if it was DORA, even if you could do that with DORA down to the team, that's what matters, right? The context of that team versus that team. That team might be iOS development, and that team is web development. So the story's different. But the qualitative story there is the same too, where it's like their context is different than theirs. And so getting it down to the team, I think was the biggest advancement in the story of moving maybe from DORA to the next stuff with the qualitative surveys.
That's great. That was going to be a follow-up question, actually. What was the sort of inflection point for when you realized, well, DORA tells us a lot of great stuff, but maybe not everything? But I want to move on because we've got some really good context here, I think, and a lot of overlap, hearing some of the same sort of experiences, which is great. But I want to know, like, who is the primary audience for your developer productivity data? How do you present that to them? How do you decide who that owner is going to be? And then how do they use that to drive their decision-making?
I can start for this. So we measure our audiences across multiple levels. So one is definitely the platform engineering team, to understand how well are our tools in service of developer usage. So definitely these metrics help our platform engineers identify and course correct or take prioritization goals, but it's also for our leadership, for example, our VPs, to know how their orgs are doing with respect to the metrics that we are interested in. So like scorecards, it really provides a way for leadership to own. And when I say leadership, not necessarily just platform engineering, but across the org, across the company leadership, to be able to understand how well their organization is with respect to certain metrics like test insights or test coverage or production readiness or deployment frequency. And then from there, be able to incorporate these into their weekly ops meetings to be able to drive that number down. And that, I think, has proven to not just be like the platform engineering driving the change, but it also brings the entire company through to get into the change that we would like to do, yeah.
No, that's really insightful. Thank you. I'm sorry, real quick. Is everybody hearing us okay in the back? Great. Okay, awesome. Thanks. Just want to make sure.
You asked who's responsible for developer productivity.
Yes.
Everyone.
I love that answer.
That wasn't coordinated. I think it's transparently, though, it's been a journey. I think what we saw early in the snapshots was the easiest way to present the data before everybody was fully bought into just going to DX and looking was these executive review type things. And early, probably a split room. There were people that got it, and there were people that were like, thanks, infrastructure. What are you going to do about it, right? And so getting those people on board with the narrative of, we did it. We did the survey. Now it's your turn. But but it is shared. I think of the 13 or so drivers that we do today, there's probably 3 or 4 that, we do coordinate the snapshot ahead of quarterly planning, for example, so it can be an input into the drivers that we feel platform can impact. Again, there's been an understanding built there over time, like these are not necessarily like observability, for example, or, production debugging. You're not going to see it like instantly. Like it's like, okay, thanks for the input. We're going to go plan. We're going to do things for probably 2 snapshots, and then you'll start to see a trend. So anyways, there's that subset that I do think platform in our case is responsible for, but the rest is shared. It's more of a leadership go drive downward all the way to the frontline manager that we expect you to triage your results, set where you're going to improve in. We'd like to see you improve in those things. If you don't, that's okay. It's a conversation. But yeah, everybody.
So down at the individual teams
Yep.
and making local improvements and things like that.
I think similar to the story I told about the DORA stuff, it's a conversation to have at the executive summary level, but it's not what's most useful. So we still do that. It's to talk about the meta, but you've got to go down. You've got to go lower.
No, great, thank you.
I'd echo that too. I think the audience I have for this work is starts with SLT. It starts with SLT +1, working to understand where we are today, working to understand where each individual leader and their group is today, but also helping bridge the gap to what help is available for your team, what investments are we making on your team's behalf, what do we need from you to really come along for the journey with us. So I work in kind of an interesting situation maybe among this group. So I work at the leadership level for that guy right there. This is Anthony Moisant, the Chief Information Officer of Indeed. And I work as a part of kind of a group of different organizations that own this problem space. So there's a UX operations team, there's a developer productivity team, there's a product operating model group, or PMO. So I work to be the glue between the data that we provide and the roadmaps that we need to invest in to help make sure we are closing the loop on all of the feedback we're getting. So I provide the data via DX, I provide other data via direct measurements, but I am the one who's working directly on behalf of kind of the people who are doing the survey and filling out, telling us what problems need to be solved in the organization, to be their voice at the leadership team level to help carve out that time and space to make these problems go away. So my audience starts at the top, but it really is all the way down to the people on the teams because they ping me directly, they want to know more, they want their problem solved, they want to be heard. And I'm that person to hear their concerns and speak to leadership to make sure that we are getting the right problem solved.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think the tool is pretty much for me more like an accountability driving tool for us basically. So we were actually in the both modes also. That used to be a time when whoever owns the tool owns developer productivity, and that never actually works. And like what he was saying, it is actually like it takes a village to actually make developer productivity happen, and it requires a culture change. So to answer your specific question about like how the tool is getting used, what we're right now doing is we want to actually make sure it's not just the actual team that is actually doing the work is involved in it. Even our people ops team is kind of using this team here, just to make sure when we talk about deep work, how much meeting times are they going to be spending time on? Like these are important information that they want to bring it all together. So the tool is getting used by our exec team. Drew is always on the tool. He logs in almost every day, which is great. Our executive team also starts looking into it. Our actual teams that are doing the work, they are also using it, and that's where the drill down actually helps us a lot. So 2 things. One is accountability shared across the company, and this definitely helps us to get there. And the second one is the drill down and the information that the tool has helps to do the accountability in a nicer way across the company here.
I'm glad you brought up that kind of CEO level visibility. I mean, how much of a difference does that make? Does that really give you a big benefit?
Night and day.
Wow.
It makes a huge difference. He definitely cares about this a lot because he thinks it offers a huge leverage here. But the moment he starts looking into it, his Excel team actually starts looking into it. He wants to know more about the data. That drives the right type of culture for the company, and it makes our life actually much easier. I mean, my engineering team and the PM team are also here. They do an amazing job. But without that as team level support, it's going to be incredibly hard for us to like climb the hill here.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a big lesson. So.
I'll add to that real quick. My prior VP last 2 snapshots ago, before I got to the results, I received a Google Doc link of like Chris's DX snapshot hot takes of like this, and it was just boom, 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 boom. Why is this team this? Why is that? Like this went down by this much, etc. And so yeah, he was there, and yeah,
Fantastic.
Just to top up on that, it's the same thing over here. Even Elizabeth Stone, our CTO, looks through all the tech staff metrics, which includes scorecards, which is why all these teams include these in their ops review, because Elizabeth Stone will be looking at it and looking at like, why is your org not moving on test coverage, for example, and the DXI sentiment analysis as well.
Excellent. It's Ash, you want to?
Oh yeah, I mean, they've already kind of shared the same story because it's very similar for Pinterest, right?
Sure.
And I think that we kind of we design the metrics and the reports based on the audience, and we have a bit of a flywheel, right? And so, actions from one group feed into the other, go back to the top. We talk to execs. We generate quarterly reports. That's important. I think there's a real appetite in the company to look at developer productivity metrics and drive improvements. So that's great, and we celebrate wins. We use that as a forum to evangelize with executives and kind of rally them and show them how we're performing against our peers, looking at all the drivers. So that's one group. The second group is people managers, managers of managers. So, through the snapshot, we ask folks to triage results, and then we kind of curate detailed reports that kind of tell them key areas of improvement, and we help rank these. We're doing this at the org level because we have a shared understanding of pain points and the history, and we hope to be able to extend this to the team level soon. But I think actually the most important group in our case is developers. We've kind of seen like a grassroots movement by keeping these metrics transparent, right, and exposing these things to everybody at the team level. We're seeing these champions just sort of like rise and sort of take charge. So that's really the key thing there. We've moved from a culture of stale corporate dashboards to now, really involved and having sort of like a flywheel for looking at these metrics and driving improvements, which is great to see.
That's awesome. So I'm hearing it's important to get top-down pressurization, but also to cascade to teams, handle things at the local level, really distribute the audience for the data. So no, that's great. Thank you. So, of course, can't get away without an AI question, right? I think a lot of leaders have been asked to obviously make investments and to start trying to prove out ROI for these tools. And I think, a lot of us have seen value from that. I think it's not quite evenly distributed. Like we see some companies that are really seeing it move the needle and other ones that maybe just kind of keeping things sort of flat. So I'd like to know, how are you approaching measuring the impact of GenAI and the ROI associated with that?
I can go first here.
Sure.
We're huge fans of GenAI at Pinterest. I mean, we utilize it for personalization and content recommendation on the product side, right? And we've identified some interesting trends that I think are going to lead to long-term engagement. But when it comes to developer productivity, I can think of two examples that are worth sharing here. So the first one is Copilot, right? So, there was a big appetite for it. Everybody wanted to use it, and we've been able to deploy it to the whole company. But before we did, we were skeptical ourselves, right? Because looking at GenAI, right, like we wondered, is this really going to lead to value, or is it going to create more noise? So we sort of decided to, as we rolled out the tool, be systematic and have a systematic approach where we relied on known performance metrics and things of this nature. So along the way, we looked at things like incident per commit count and other metrics like that to make sure that we were not prioritizing speed and productivity over reliability, which is important. And so more than half of our folks at the company are using it every week, which is great. Some of the things that we track is how people are using it. And so through sentiment data and other means, we're able to understand that people are using it for, creating boilerplate, bootstrapping services, generating unit tests, and identifying dead code, which is great. The second thing, we actually innovate a little bit in this space. We have a team that actually created an interesting agent that helps service owners with support. So the idea is if you're an on-caller, you can add this thing to your channel. You can use RAG to train it on internal documentation and runbooks, and it kind of helps you resolve user requests. This is a really cool tool, and so for this we track not just usage, but we also track query response time and response efficiency and things of this nature. These tools are always reported at 80 plus CSAT, so we understand very clearly that they're valuable and people love to use them. and they're saving us about 1,000 engineering hours a week.
Wow.
So, we see real potential to drive that number way up, actually. What I would say is, like, if anyone here is currently looking at rolling out GenAI tooling, or somebody's asking you to, make everybody use Cursor at your company, before you do it, I would just urge you to do the pre-work to talk to your developers to understand their pain points, and just focus your energy in that direction.
Can I influence you to open source that bot?
I can talk to the team. Yeah, for sure.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think so. We've got some interesting things we're cooking up. So I think the big thing about AI is we're not quite sure what all it's good for yet. And so we've taken the approach that we need to try things. Some things are going to work great, like unit test coverage. It turns out AI, LLMs are pretty good at that. But other things, maybe not so much. So I think I would echo the sentiment around usage data plus what is the sentiment around that. So if you have weekly active users that are 90% of your coding base using this every week, but they only accept 30% of the suggestions from the LLM, maybe that number doesn't matter so much because you're getting spaghetti code, you're vibe coding, right? So I think there's kind of that element of like, how do you get both the active usage plus the sentiment? Some of the interesting use cases, though, like we're thinking about how to do broad, like library upgrades and things like that, cross-organizational tech initiatives that would normally take teams like time out of their roadmap for the quarter. Maybe it's something that's a little bit more straightforward, it's not so much nuanced, but it's still something that's a tax on people's time. So how can we maybe generate a merge request with AI that then a team can review and then maybe see if it works? And we have, I think, over 1,500 merge requests we've done that way, and I think we are at about a 75% accept rate on those at the moment. So that's a really big success story for us. I think the other thing I'll point out too is we're actually taking our first steps towards, in the spirit of piloting things, how do you get AI integrated into the code review process? So one of the big things that we run into is cross-team collaboration, just time to get teams code reviews. You have a team in Austin, you have a team in Tokyo. That's a high latency code review process. So if you can short circuit that, even if it's maybe not the best code review, it gets someone some feedback. They can start to, if it's valuable feedback, make some changes automatically, start working through that immediately. You cut that 24-hour turnaround on the messaging back to something that's actionable for a team ahead of the next day. So.
Oh, that's great. Really impressive.
Yeah. We had a very different type of journey in Dropbox. We were actually one of the earliest adopters of AI tools back 2 years ago, but the adoption wasn't great because the models weren't ready at the time. LLMs were hallucinating. So what was interesting is like our CEO Drew, he's an engineer himself. So if you go look at his laptop, he has like multiple LLMs working, automations there. So he operates very, very differently compared to other CEOs that we know of. So he basically said that, hey, I want to see how AI is getting adopted in the company. I want to actually drive adoption in the company. And this is probably one of the wins that we had this year, where we literally came from 10% adoption to all the way close to 80%, north of 80% right now in a quarter. And like what he was saying, we were also looking at code acceptance rate. We were trying to also look at, do they have a GitHub Copilot, how it's being used versus how Cursor is being used. What was interesting is, like, even though developers know AI and they understand all these tools, giving them the right type of training and also making sure that their asks are being met were actually very well received. Like we could see a lot of anecdotal evidence that, hey, I didn't know this, I could do this with this kind of thing. I didn't know I could write migration codes between Playwright and Selenium. So it was very, very interesting to look at all this qualitative feedback. At the same time, we also saw some negative feedback also, right? Hey, it is hallucinating, it's a waste of time. So we are actually in the phase of like collecting all the data, and that is also one of the areas where DX platform was useful, where it was a level playing field for us to look at adoption across the company, and we were able to drive change management through the DX tool. And AI adoption is actually going pretty well, and we're very happy about it right now.
That seems to be the pattern, like really advocating for, evangelizing the different high-value use cases for it, making sure everybody's really educated, reducing the fear and everything like that associated with it. That seems to be the characteristics of folks that are having the best time with it. So.
I think we have Copilot that we launched in 2023, and what we found was that it's great at a couple of things, like generating boilerplate code, for example. And now that we have been through that, we're looking more into, hey, can we get some Netflix specific context through these LLMs? And so now we are evaluating a couple of other agentic tools that are out there, like Cursor or Windsurf. We are in that process for 3 different tasks. So one is code generation, code debugging, and test generation. I think these 3 are the areas that are of focus right now. Our way of measuring would be not just acceptance rate, but also the number of lines of code that have actually made it to production, because that would really indicate whether these LLMs that they generate the responses, whether that's just been like accepted, or like some different developers have different ways of using the acceptance. And so actually seeing the number of lines of code from AI that actually made it to production drives a little bit more thorough signal. So that's one way that we are looking at measuring.
Well, not everybody hits the accept button, right? And so
Yeah.
it can skew it a little bit, but that's, I guess, a more reliable metric. So
I think the only thing I'd probably add is when we started measuring, we did the just-in-time surveying or action-based surveying. So literally when somebody would merge a pull request, they'd get the DM that says, hey, we just saw you merge pull request. Did you use Copilot? If yes, we'd keep going, etc. So I think that was a good way to introduce the surveying in that case. It wasn't just a big bang. It was targeted because we saw they merged a pull request, and I think that was helpful. So.
well, some great answers. So believe it or not, we are 45 minutes into our panel, and that has just flown by. But I want to make sure that we have time for the audience to ask a few questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the audience Q&A kind of part of this. And if we get a chance to, we can look at some of those other questions. So
Yeah, so a lot of what you spoke to is aimed at either the developers or the executives who are sponsoring, right? Have you had success stories helping the line manager, right? The hardest working person in software engineering, the team line manager, right? Where they have too much span of control, they have too many projects. Have you had success stories or focused efforts on not on the developer productivity, but the line manager's ability to manage?
Thank you. Yes. I think when I mentioned driving down through the team, I meant at every level. And really where the expectation is that the engineering manager, the line manager understands their data. And the success is in them when they're triaging the results and they're setting their next improvement. DX will go back and say, hey, you set this improvement on your team. Did you actually see improvement, yes or no? I think we hit a stride 4 or 5 snapshots ago where we got into this rhythm where people started trusting the data, which is also important, right? Like we blow our HR survey participation out of the water with DX because people see that the survey matters and gets actioned on. And so when the engineering manager is talking with their team, that's a critical point. Hey, I've seen our data, let's retro it, etc. They're coming up with that improvement. They're setting it in DX. And then we have the screen on the next one that of the teams that set improvement, I forget what the last time I looked at it was, 80-90% of those teams saw improvement in the thing they set. And so that gets, again, you're seeing that because we're holding the engineering manager accountable for knowing the details, their world is improving by the respective areas that they're improving. So.
I think one thing, just to echo a little bit, I've seen that DX allows line managers to make time to solve the problems their teams care about. And so documentation is actually a big one for us. We had a team who owns a bunch of developer platform tools, and so they have their own developers, don't necessarily feel their documentation's up to snuff, and they also feel like their customers are not getting the right documentation from their team. And they were able to make the case with the survey results to their leadership chain to say, look, like the team doesn't like this. The team thinks we're not doing a good job on behalf of our customers, our internal customers. We should be able to carve out time for this. And they did. They were able to, actually. And in the past, it was never a priority for them to do documentation to that degree. They redid their entire wiki space. They came up with a bunch of self-service documentation. And really, it was actually something we highlighted in some of our, we heard you. Here's what we did about what you said in the surveys, because it was such a great example of just like, we want you to take the insights and drive them to action. And we want people at every level of the organization to be empowered to do that.
And even the scorecards example that I had given earlier is all coming through implementation wise from the line managers, because that really drives their team health in terms of leveraging that during ops meetings to drive down those numbers. And it not just goes all the way to the leadership, but comes down to engineers, but also to the line managers. I actually see line managers would be like the first level consumption of these scorecards even before leadership.
Hey, thanks for all the insights. I'm with Geico Tech, lead the product management for the developer engineering team. I want to understand a little bit more about, you mentioned code assistant tools beyond Copilot. I'm also we're questioning how to measure, the acceptance rate being low with Copilot. Do you have any more insights that you could share with your experience with Cursor and Windsurf?
Yeah, so at least the other agentic tools, we are right now in the process of piloting. But I do say that acceptance rate is probably skewed because not every developer accepts it. Sometimes they'll look at it, but then know what it is about and then go into like coding it on their own or modifying their own. So we found that acceptance rate by default was not a great metric as a solo single North Star metric to look at, which is why we pivoted to incorporating number of lines of code that made it into production, because now then that tells us the amount of value or where AI is getting generated. A lot of these companies actually give you that APIs to measure. So, for example, Windsurf, Cursor, all of them will give you those APIs that allow you to measure.
Hi. So, one of the challenges I think that we often see is if we have like an SLT, thinking about how do we make our engineering organization or development organization more efficient, productive, quickly, right? And that can be viewed from the line managers and down as stalkerware, right? Versus what I think I'm hearing, especially gentlemen from Twilio, that the ideal, right, if Jez Humble describes DevOps as a community of practice, right? A lot of what we're describing around DX and space framework is also a community of practice. Have you seen challenges between this ideal from senior leadership and how do we get more from less? Because that's really what we're talking about, and combine that with how do we enable self-innovation around developer process in order to drive greater results in productivity? How have you seen that balance be struck within these platforms?
Thanks. That's a great question.
That's a great question. I think that what I want to say here is that culture is the most important thing, right? I'm sorry for my voice. I'm recovering from laryngitis. Thanks. So that made my whole month awesome. Yeah, I mean, developer productivity ultimately is not a technical problem. It's a socio-technical problem, right? And so what I mean by that is that, yeah, tooling and platforms are important, but they go asymptote relatively quickly, meaning, you start hitting diminishing returns unless you focus on the human element and the organizational dynamics, right? So like earlier on at Pinterest, we were very solution focused. So we built the tools and then we expected adoption. So we didn't do the work, really. We saw some, we saw some results, but really nothing really groundbreaking until we learned that real success really centered around 3 pillars. And you have to really work at these and work really hard at these. It's a continuous work. Number 1 is tooling. Number 2 is process. And number 3, culture, right? And so we kind of moved into like a change management mentality where we focused on creating the right incentives, which takes a lot of work. It's easier said than done. DX helps a lot, by the way. Celebrating wins and, focusing on, making people sort of like motivating people to do the work themselves, right? And so, because when it comes down to it, developers don't really, what they care about the most is eliminating toil, right? Like they don't really want to feel like they're being made more productive, right? You kind of get into a bit of a psychological quagmire if you frame things that way. So I feel like that's just the best approach to take is work on those three pillars, and it's not easy, but everything starts coming together over time.
I think I'd say +1 to the culture bit. I don't call it developer productivity unless I'm here. Internally, I don't call it developer productivity. I think it's developer experience. And I find myself explaining a lot through the predicts nomenclature that the DORA research kind of highlighted. I just, research says, science says, happy developers predict these outcomes. I've seen other tools. I've seen other tools at Twilio that try to measure productivity. Spoiler, they haven't gotten the results out of that tool that they're looking for. And we're replacing it with DX. So, I think it's culture about, and also, in our case, it didn't come top down or bottoms up. I introduced it as a line manager from the middle of the org and talked about developer experience and making people happier in strenuous times, what the industry's been going through. I think that it's resonated. And then, like I said, it's a survey that they see us talking about, they see us putting importance on as leaders, they see us doing something about, and so that drives the flywheel.
So I think the culture bit is really important, and I think the other part of this I'd talk about is like I had to present to our board of directors on this topic, and I think to your point, it's they want to do more with less, but the conversation changes a little bit when you come in and you say, here's the heat map from DX about the 1,000 problems facing our organization. It's not that I need an AI tool that's a silver bullet that's going to make people do 3 times as much code. It's I need teams to be able to work together because we have teams in Austin and Tokyo, and that's really hard for them to work together on synchronous code and feedback. And so I think there's this level of like granular data that's required to really be able to say, we have a bunch of problems that need to be solved. And my focus is not performance enabling people, our fancy word for performance management. It's not, squeeze people harder and make them work harder and get these things to go better. It's, we have a lot of waste in the system. We have a lot of problems that need to be solved. And I can give you the most granular data you've ever had straight from the source, in addition to instrumented data, to be able to say, here are the investments we need to be making. And here is what I need from you for roadmap time, for dollars of investment, and for focus for the organization to actually make an impact so that we can remove these problems from the teams and get more work done. And I think somebody else had said this too, there's an SLT conversation and there's an organizational conversation. And I think where those two things come together for me is when we brought DX into the organization, people were concerned, is this going to be used against us somehow? We're in the age of, tech layoffs and, performance being squeezed and all that. And so I had the great good fortune to be able to say, this will not be used in the performance management process. We are aggregating at the team level. We will not get any individual data. There is a sacrosanct sort of like agreement between the teams and me as the arbiter of this data that I want to know what your problems are so I can go spend millions of dollars and thousands of hours to get them off your plate. So I think hey, there we go, broke it, sorry. But I think that's really the key is not everybody has that seat at the table with their leadership team, and not everybody has the data required to make that argument. And so those are 2 avenues by which I think you have to work your organizational leadership chain to be able to have the right conversation about these problems.
We've got time for one more.
Actually, I want to just +1 to what he just said. When we say developer productivity, it's not about individual developer productivity, and it's not about measuring how many commits did this developer do, which was something that developers had this angst, like now are you like Big Brother watching me? But these aggregate level surveys and aggregate level measurement of quantitative data now really helps us identify the areas where the tools or the services that we are employing, whether it has value, whether it's driving improvement and reducing toil, which is what developers care about, versus their individual productivity. We're not looking to like measure number of commits they made, or just because one made 50 commits and the other made 5 commits doesn't mean anything in terms of performance.
I think we'll do 2 more. So.
Okay, so I'm new to the DX world, so maybe this question is more for you. So I kept on listening to this DX survey and all that. All I know is that we use DORA metrics. Now, are these surveys auto-populated based on the DORA metrics, or I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, given the content which you guys delivered, you're not like, no one is there actually populating those questions, right? It's all like probably based on the Git activity or the Jira activity. It's all getting calculated and questions are being asked to individual teams. Is that the case? Like, I mean, how do you shepherd the kind of questions you want to ask to your developers?
I wonder if DX team wants to take this.
We have Abhi in the audience. Abhi, do you want to take that one? No. How well do our customers know our product? So, Jesse, how about Jesse? I could answer it, but that's cheating.
No, it's absolutely people responding to the survey. There's quantitative data on the side, but it's qualitative. It is how are developers feeling, and again, back to the predictive language is like prediction that they will, as if they're feeling good, if things are improving for them day to day, we predict things will go up and to the right generally. So yeah, it's survey data. I mean, Avi and team have nailed it. It's Slack. And something about that UX. I mean, like I said, our last survey was 97% participation. It's always been above 90. I keep waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm waiting for the like, oh no, we're in the 80s, but it keeps going up, and HR keeps wondering how I'm doing it. But
we do have folks using Teams and email as well, but yeah, pretty overwhelmingly Slack. So yeah.
I think one thing that would be unique for DX surveys is the drivers. So it's not just a bunch of questions thrown at you. It's also there are like certain drivers, and based on that, you'd be able to like drill down and filter through at an organization level. And that clarity, I don't think you'd get through homegrown surveys. At least we didn't find that through homegrown surveys or just a generic survey. So that robust filtering capability, I think was a really something that gave us a lot of results, like what I had shared in one of our biggest wins.
And when you hear these 90% participate, for anybody who's ever tried to run an engineering survey before, you know that that's a really good number, and it does come down to this integration. So
Can I just add one more thing?
please, yeah.
I think it's important to highlight here that the value of leveraging a platform like DX is also that you don't have to hire researchers, because they have really smart people that do the investigative work. They parse through white papers, and they're exposing it to you as a service. So that's a big win. I just wanted to highlight that.
No, thanks. Appreciate that.
yeah,
Comes out of the box.
Yeah, and I'll even plus one to that. Not only do they help you with the questions, we have gone and done UX and product specific questions for Indeed that are not a part of the existing data set and drivers. And they worked with our product and UX leadership teams, came up with drivers that made sense, put statistical like rigor behind it, and made sure that we weren't like leading people to.
But even if 90%, we kind of tell them that, hey, you need to please attend to the survey. And, still we cannot get 90%. And still we cannot get inquisitive answers sometimes. And those questions are basically needs to be well formed in a way that we can get as much information as possible. So, but we don't get that. So that's what I was.
Yeah, and one other thing that at least we are working with DX is also crafting custom workflows. Like not every question works for all types of developers. Like you have software engineers, but you also have security engineers or like reliability engineers or privacy engineers, and their needs are very different from a regular software developer. And so not the same question or the same workflow might not work, and DX survey also gives you this ability to create these custom workflows. And we also partner closely with DX at that point in time to craft some of these workflows, which are very custom and tailored.
So we can do these dynamically targeted studies on top of the out-of-the-box questions that we have that are very well researched, known and validated as very effective questions. But then, yeah, we've got this ability to kind of branch dynamically too.
So for this audience, of course, everybody here understands that developer experience is about improving the experience, not about measuring productivity or measuring performance. However, there is a trend in the industry, especially nowadays, that you guys mentioned. Leadership teams, or at least in some companies, leadership teams are trying to see if they can tie performance to amount of code generated, number of code reviews done, best practices adopted, all of that type of stuff. How do you think about heading off some of those leadership-driven conversations to convince them that that's either the right way of doing it, but you need to tailor it, or not the right way of doing it, and instead do X and you'll get the same type of benefits?
Kind of back to the answers we were just giving, I personally lean very heavily into DX because of the research behind it. I think it's almost ironic. It's like folks will come off reading the Accelerate book and then want to measure all the stuff that we just talked about we shouldn't measure. And so I sway them away from that by pointing at the workflows and how these drivers are, again, research statistically. Science says this driver is worded this way for this reason, this workflow, et cetera. And so I actively try to drive people away from it. I don't know if it answers your question. Like I'm not appeasing the people who are just like, I just want to see a line chart of commits. And I'm like, politely, I don't care.
Plus one to what you said also, right? I think there needs to be a central team that is looking after the tools, and their job is to actually frame these problems to the exec team. And like you said, SLT execs are going to ask about productivity and like how I can actually do a lot more throughput. But it's more about how we get the research into it, the data into it, and also frame the problem to them. And also for us, what also worked is like, hey, when we started getting benchmarks from these teams and also tying into the DXI, and that tells you that, hey, 1 point of DXI increase could lead to X on this benchmark. And these are the ways you all can get it. That was a huge way for us to go and demonstrate to them, also saying that, hey, these are the tactics that we can do to get there. And it's also about how we frame to the execs as well as the organization, the team, and the line managers also. Like the reason why we are doing DXI, the reason why we are focused on like these pain points is it helps you to build this, and this will help you improve your experience on the developers.
This is maybe a tactical answer to your question, but I'm lucky enough to have a very technical boss who's on the leadership team. My CTO, he gets it. So the more you can leverage leadership team members and voices to understand, they get it, right? 1 commit means nothing, 10 commit means nothing, right? Like, well, yeah, they updated a README 10 times, who cares, right? So like, the more you can get those strong leadership voices who get it to be able to present on your behalf, or even present directly in some cases, that is, I think, the key to getting people to understand that, like, yeah, this isn't the same thing as like a sales ticket queue or something like that, right? Like it doesn't translate to an outcome that you care about. You have to care about it from a research-based perspective where we are measuring the right things, probably as lagging indicators, and we are using these to understand the health of our organization and if we are solving the right problems. And I can point you to the list of investments we need to make. These are the things that will solve the problems for you. And it's not going to be the number of commits is going to go up and to the right, right?
I do think you touched on one interesting bit, lagging indicators being a problem for leadership teams. And I wonder, how do you negate that effect of, well, surveys are by very definition lagging indicators. They're sentiment based, right? A lot of companies, Meta, for example, use something called UPND, as in perceived user disruptions. or perceived navigation disruptions, etc., to find a leading indicator for that. But there are other companies that are doing it differently, and even those are not necessarily good enough. So how do you bridge that lagging indicator piece?
I got very lucky. Like full transparency. Like my people get it. And so when we were talking about setting OKRs and setting goals around what our roadmap should be and how we're going to use the DX Core 4 and all the good things, we know what Goodhart's Law is. I talked about the Jira example earlier where it's like, we did this. Remember what we did with Jira? We set delivery lead time goals on Jira, and people just made automation and it did nothing for us and we wasted a bunch of time. So like being able to communicate that in context to people who are long lived at the company like myself, I think that helps. But it really is a struggle. Like, I'm not sure I have a great answer for you. There's maybe not a silver bullet to this, but I think the more you can communicate the value of, here's the roadmap and the investments we need to make to solve the problems, and here's where we're going to look to see that we're doing the right things, and we can course correct if the lagging indicators are moving how we care about. Like, I think it's got to be the story that you tell, and it's got to be the way that you think about this. And it is a sticky situation to tell somebody you're going to spend $50 million to make things better, and we're going to find out 3 months from now if it's working or not. But I think that you may have more success with that than you may expect, depending on your culture.
I wonder if by nature developer productivity is a lagging metric because it's hard to like get a leading indicator, but I wonder some quantitative metrics might help, like your PR cycle time, or be it number of diffs. Again, number of diffs is a very dicey question, so it has to be articulated in the right way to make sure that it's not being used as a performance management tool. But some of the core 4 framework, I see a balance between leading and lagging indicators there.
So a typical developer workflow, take a look at it, like these surveys are done, we are talking about every 3 months or whatever. But then a developer is pushing code every single day to production. Just as we finish our Uber ride, we get a simple, how was your ride? So what if, like the developer who pushed the code gets a simple notification, how was your experience? Tie that with this lagging indicator and you have a perfect balance. So in our case, we were able to address a lot of deployment issues, address a lot of CI friction, the things that we were talking about, like disruptions to a developer on a daily basis. Because we were tracking this, their experience on an everyday basis as they were deploying code or as they were interacting with some of the systems. We called the system as real-time feedback system, and it helped us quite a bit. So I feel there's a balance that can be drawn here. Yeah.
What's your name and which company? Because I want to talk to you later and understand what you did. Yeah.
So Pratesh, Director of Engineering at LinkedIn.
So we are over time. I feel like we could go on for hours, but the panelists are going to join you for some networking after this to make sure you get some food and some drink. But how about another round of applause for how generous our panelists were with their answers?